You know, we all grew up with those classic fairy tales.
Oh, yeah.
And like so often the villains just feel kind of one-dimensional, like
Yeah.
just bad, no real depth, you know?
Right.
It makes you wonder if there's something more to the story,
Yeah.
especially with someone like Cinderella's stepmother, Lady Tremaine.
Exactly, and that's what we're doing today.
Right?
You've shared some really interesting material with me, an interview with Lady Tremaine,
Yeah.
giving her side of the Cinderella story,
Right.
and an article called Single Parent Struggles,
Yeah.
Tips for Support.
Okay, so instead of just taking the fairy tale at face value,
Yeah.
we're going to use these sources to take a deep dive into the complexities of single parenthood.
Yeah.
And by doing that, we can maybe try to understand Lady Tremaine's actions in a new light.
Absolutely.
And our mission here isn't to make excuses or anything like that,
Right.
but just to really understand.
I think that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got Lady Tremaine's perspective filtered through this interview.
Huh.
And then we've got this really grounded perspective on what single parents actually face today. It's a great comparison to explore.
Okay, so let's jump right in with Lady Tremaine's perspective from the interview.
Okay.
Right away, she says that she feels unsettled by being called infamous.
Interesting.
So right there, she's suggesting that she doesn't see herself as the one-dimensional bad guy.
Yeah, it seems like she doesn't recognize herself in that label at all.
Right.
Makes you think about how she sees her own actions versus how the world views her through the Cinderella story.
Yeah,
It's a big difference.
totally. And then she goes on to talk about this often overlooked part of the story.
Okay.
She was already a widow with 2 daughters when she married Cinderella's father.
Right.
And just blending families in general is really tough.
Yeah, that's hard enough as it is.
And then you add in the grief and the loss and,
Absolutely.
you know, dynamics of bringing 2 different groups of kids together under one roof.
It's definitely not a simple situation.
Not at all.
Not an easy transition for anyone.
And then she gives us this detail that totally changes the traditional Cinderella picture.
Oh, okay. What's that?
She describes Cinderella's father as distant and grieving,
Hmm.
as if he just put the whole responsibility of raising Cinderella onto her shoulders.
While he was still alive.
Yeah,
That changes things.
right. It's not the evil stepmother coming in and breaking up a happy home.
Right.
It's more like she's thrown into this situation where
Yeah.
she's the primary caregiver for Cinderella.
Before the father even passes away.
Right. And of course, then he does die.
Yeah.
And that leaves Lady Tremaine as a single parent.
Wow.
Not to 1, but to 3 girls.
With no income.
With no income, right?
So suddenly it's not just a fairy tale anymore.
Right.
There's real financial pressure.
Huge real-world implications.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then she gets into her justification for how Cinderella was treated in the home.
Okay.
She describes Cinderella as dreamy and out of touch with their money problems,
Oh.
while her own daughters understood that everybody had to pitch in.
So she's drawing a pretty stark contrast there
Right.
between Cinderella and her own daughters.
Exactly.
So she positions her daughters as the responsible ones,
Yeah.
like she was trying to prepare them for a tough world.
Yeah. And then she says that Cinderella acted like hard work was beneath her.
That's interesting because that's like the complete opposite of how we usually see Cinderella,
Totally.
the overworked servant.
Yeah.
So is she suggesting Cinderella wasn't a victim of circumstance, but maybe someone who just didn't want to pull her weight?
That's what she's implying. Yeah.
Hmm.
And then she goes even further and asks the interviewer this really pointed question.
Okay, what does she say?
If she was such a victim, why didn't she leave?
Ooh.
Why did she stay until the prince showed up?
Okay, so that makes us rethink things a little bit.
Totally.
It brings up the question of Cinderella's agency.
Right.
Was she really powerless, or did she choose to stay?
Right.
I mean, Lady Tremaine's question seems to suggest that Cinderella was being strategic.
Maybe even opportunistic. Okay. Moving on. She insists she wasn't cruel, just strict and practical.
Okay.
And she says that she wanted her daughters to marry well to secure their futures. And so they wouldn't face the same struggles that she did.
I mean, that's a pretty understandable parental concern,
Yeah.
even if the methods are a little questionable.
Yeah, for sure. And then she talks about the ball.
Okay.
And she basically says that Cinderella had no prospects, no title, no wealth.
Uh-huh.
So it made no sense for her to go to the ball.
It's a cold assessment,
Right.
but also, like, pretty practical.
It's very much rooted in the social reality of the time.
Yeah, I mean, from her perspective, the ball was about her daughters.
Yeah.
Improving their social standing,
Exactly.
finding good husbands.
And Cinderella didn't fit into that equation.
No, not at all.
But here's where the interview takes a real turn.
Okay.
Lady Tremaine admits that when she saw Cinderella at the ball,
Yeah.
she realized that she had underestimated her.
Interesting.
And she uses the word cunning to describe Cinderella, as if Cinderella had all these hidden resources.
So what do you think that means for Lady Tremaine?
I think it means she felt deceived.
Yeah.
Like this meek Cinderella suddenly was this totally different person.
Much more resourceful.
Right.
And almost manipulative.
Yeah.
And she had no idea.
Right. And then she makes this prediction.
What's that?
She says that if Cinderella marries the prince, it will lead to a rewriting of the past, where she and her daughters are the villains.
So she sees exactly what's going to happen.
Right, like she's watching the narrative play out in real time.
That's fascinating.
Right, and she's aware of how history is written by the winners.
Yeah.
And that brings us to her really cutting line. History favors the winner. And Cinderella won.
It's cynical, but probably true.
It is true.
It's how we tell stories.
Yeah.
And Lady Tremaine knows it.
Totally. Okay, now let's move on to her regrets.
Okay.
And this is surprising, but she actually expresses sadness for not protecting her own daughters.
From the ridicule.
Yeah.
Wow. That's unexpected.
Yeah.
You don't expect that from the evil stepmother.
It shows a different side of her.
Yeah, it shows her maternal instincts.
Yeah.
A vulnerability.
And she also regrets not realizing Cinderella's true nature sooner.
What do you think she means by true nature?
I think she means that cunning side that we were talking about,
Right.
and that she felt betrayed.
Like Cinderella was playing a part the whole time.
Exactly. And her final regret is marrying Cinderella's father.
Because it put her in such a hard spot.
Right. And I think a lot of her actions came from that initial vulnerability and then the financial insecurity that followed.
Right. So it all goes back to that foundational challenge.
Totally.
Being a single parent.
Yeah.
Especially back then.
Okay, so we've heard Lady Tremaine's story.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's look at this article. Single parent struggles, tips for support.
Yeah, this is going to give us some real-world context for what she went through.
The article starts with a personal story of someone who became a single parent at 21. And they describe all these feelings.
Yeah.
Shock, devastation, and like a deep fear of having to raise this child alone.
With no experience.
With no experience.
And that's something that I think a lot of single parents can relate to.
Totally. I think that feeling of being totally unprepared is pretty universal. Okay, so then the article goes on to list common struggles that single parents face.
Yeah.
And the first one is financial hardship.
Makes sense.
Things like reduced income, the cost of childcare, housing, just the constant stress of debt and instability.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what Lady Tremaine was dealing with.
After her husband died.
Right. The article even says that a huge percentage of single parents live close to the poverty line.
It's really tough.
So you can see how these financial worries would be front and center for Lady Tremaine.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the article also talks about the emotional and psychological stuff.
Like what?
Like loneliness, isolation, stress, burnout, guilt, even self-doubt.
It's a lot.
Yeah. And even though Lady Tremaine doesn't say this directly in the interview, it's hard to imagine she wasn't feeling some of this too.
I think that's right.
I mean, think about it. The responsibility of 3 daughters, the sudden loss of her husband, the financial insecurity.
You put all that together.
Yeah.
And it's a recipe for some serious stress.
Totally.
And that could explain some of the harsher choices she made.
Maybe she was just trying to hold it all together.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the article talks about the practical challenges.
Like what kinds of things?
Balancing work and life.
Right.
Making decisions on your own all the time. Just the exhaustion of doing everything yourself.
Yeah.
And again, this is all stuff Lady Tremaine would have faced.
Especially back then.
Exactly.
Like there weren't the same support systems in place.
Right.
No social safety nets.
And then the article talks about the impact on the kids.
How so?
It says there can be emotional, social, academic problems. But it also says that plenty of kids raised by single parents do amazing.
It's important to remember that.
Absolutely. It's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
But it does acknowledge that the parent struggles can affect the kids.
That makes sense.
So maybe that's part of why Lady Tremaine was so focused on getting her daughters married?
Like she wanted to protect them from the life she was living?
I think so.
Makes you see her motivations in a different light?
Yeah.
Even if you don't agree with her methods?
Right. Interesting.
Okay, so when we look at all of this together, Lady Tremaine's concern for her daughter's financial future, it really connects to the financial problems of single parents today.
Yeah, that feels very real and relatable.
Totally. And even though she doesn't talk about loneliness or burnout directly, It's hard to believe she didn't experience those things.
I think it's safe to say that she did.
Yeah, but there's also a big contrast between how Lady Tremaine treats Cinderella and all the stuff in the article about how important emotional support is for single parents.
Yeah, that's a key difference. The article really emphasizes listening and encouraging and understanding.
Right.
And Lady Tremaine doesn't seem to do any of that.
So she's not getting that kind of support.
And she's not giving it either.
Right.
And you have to think about the expectations and the lack of support for single mothers back then.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like, she was probably really isolated.
And under a lot of pressure.
To figure things out on her own.
Okay, so the article also talks about what we can do to better support single parents today.
Yeah. What are some of the suggestions?
Well, on an individual level, it says we can offer practical help, like running errands or childcare.
Those things make a big difference.
Yeah. And also just being there to listen and offer encouragement and sharing resources like information about support groups or financial aid or childcare options.
Right.
Just those small acts of support can make a huge difference for a single parent who's feeling overwhelmed.
Absolutely. And what about on a community level?
On a community level, the article suggests creating support groups, offering affordable childcare options, and advocating for policies that help single-parent families, like paid family leave and affordable housing.
Okay, so bigger picture solutions.
Yeah, exactly.
And what about organizations?
So organizations can provide financial assistance through grants or scholarships.
Okay.
They can offer educational programs on things like parenting and budgeting. And they can work with communities to support single parents.
Okay, so lots of different ways to make a difference.
Yep.
So bringing it all back to Lady Tremaine.
Yeah.
After hearing about the challenges of single parenthood, do you see her actions and motivations differently?
I think it adds a layer of complexity to the fairy tale.
Yeah.
It doesn't excuse her behavior.
Right.
But it helps us understand where she's coming from.
It's all about context.
Exactly.
We're not trying to let her off the hook.
No.
But we're trying to understand the circumstances.
Right. And maybe see the human being behind the villain label.
Okay, so the big takeaway here is that by looking at Lady Tremaine's story and comparing it to what single parents face today, we start to see that there's a lot more to the story.
Than just good versus evil.
Right.
Like those labels are too simple.
They don't capture the whole picture.
Yeah, it's all about nuance.
And that brings us to a final thought for our listeners.
Okay.
If single parenthood is so complicated,
what
if we applied that same lens to other villains in stories? Would we see them differently?
That's a good question.
Right. What if we look for the hidden struggles and the motivations behind their actions?
It's like we're challenging ourselves to think critically.
Yeah, to look deeper.
About the stories we think we know.
And we also want to encourage you to think about the single parents in your own community.
Yeah, what kinds of support do they have?
Are there ways you can help?
Absolutely.
It's up to all of us to create a more supportive world.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
We hope it's given you a lot to think about.
Definitely.
And we'll see you next time.
See you later.